Today, I am in the mood to talk about some thriller movies. I feel like I don't really talk about them that much, and I do want to branch out as far as other genres that could be horror adjacent. So let's talk about thriller movies. I'm going to talk about 5 that hopefully you have never seen. I'm hoping for at least one on this list everyone hasn't seen, but chances are if you love movies, you might have already heard of them / seen them. But in my opinion, these are 5 very underrated thriller movies that I never or have never heard people really talk about. So let's hope you haven't either. The first one is a recent discovery that I actually purchased the DVD for. I have it like around here, that's why I'm looking around. And I had never seen it before, but I found it in a Goodwill for a couple dollars, and I saw the cast on the front of Ryan Gosling, Naomi Watts, and Ewan McGregor. And it was a thriller movie from 2005. And I was like, I am sold. I'm so here for this. So I bought it. It's called Stay. So Sam Foster is a psychiatrist, and he has a new patient, Henry, who claims to be suicidal. And reality starts to contradict fact, and Sam begins spiraling into an unstable mental state. And then he finds a clue as to how and when Henry may try to kill himself, and races to try to stop him. So I knew going into it, I would probably like it just based on those things I already listed before. And when I started watching this movie, I was astounded. I was like, I don't know what is happening. Like, I was so curious where this was gonna go. This is probably one of the most mind-bending movies I have ever seen, and honestly has some of my favorite movie transitions ever done, but it's something that's very specific to the early 2000s, and in a really good way. There's a lot of things about this that remind me, obviously, of the early 2000s, because that's the time that it was made, but it's something about the color grading, the sound design, the transitions, the DVD menu is so good. But all of that really stands out to me in this movie as being very early 2000s in such a good way, not in like a predictable, cheesy way. Like, there's something about this movie that is just, it holds up so well to me, and it's very artistic in that it's dated, and you can tell based on those things, but in a really good way, like something that we can appreciate from that era. And I feel like we don't appreciate those things. They just are written off immediately as cheesy because that era is written off as cheesy, whereas we can appreciate a lot of things from like the 70s and 80s and maybe even 90s that is very typical of that era. We appreciate them as an art form that came out of that era, and those are some of the things that stood out to me in this movie that comes from that era. So this is a random thing to say about this movie, but if you're into zodiac or astrology at all, or even pop astrology, then this will make sense to you. But this is one of the most like Pisces movies I've ever seen. It's just so dreamy, and you're always questioning reality, and it's honestly so moody and so emo. Like, some of the lines in this, I'm like, that's emo. Like, emo kids stole lines from this movie, I'm pretty sure. With that, trigger warning for self-harm and suicide. But something about it is just very Pisces and very like moody and dreamy, and I loved that atmosphere. And the journey of this movie was so fun because I loved trying to figure out what was going to happen next. I had to watch this in a couple sittings, but I kept thinking about it in between every sitting. I'm like, which I wish I watched it all in one sitting the first time I watched this, but I didn't expect it to be that kind of movie. So each time I'm trying to like piece things together and try to guess, like my brain is doing it automatically, not even me intentionally trying. My brain's trying to make something of this movie and like put pieces together and clues together. And it's because you can tell really early on in this movie that things aren't what they seem. So you definitely need to go into this movie expecting to put in a little bit of an effort. I mean, granted, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Like, it is a roller coaster in the best way. But there is some like straining. Your brain's gonna try to like fill in the gaps here because it doesn't know what's going on. And it's not a straightforward story, but I love that it's not over explained. This movie treats the audience as if we're geniuses and we're gonna piece this together in a good way. It's not like a pretentious way. I think if this movie was made today, the director would really try and push and like over explain the ending to make sure that the audience knows like, hey, this is what's happening, just so you got it right. And like I mentioned the atmosphere already, but this atmosphere, this movie is so cozy and comfy. Like, this is definitely a rewatch for me. And I love the subtleties and like the hidden meanings throughout this movie that if you pay attention to a lot of things, you will piece things together. And I loved that. Like, I caught certain things right off the bat and I was like, that is not what it's supposed to be. Like, that looks a little different. The backgrounds, you know, just pay attention to everything. But it's really nice to be able to like form your own conclusions while you're going through this movie. And even though I was like half correct about my predictions about what the end of this movie is going to be, the ending was still really satisfying to me. Even though I feel like it's not going to be that way for everyone, I really enjoyed it. Okay, next up, let's talk about a more recent movie from 2018 called Level 16. 16-year-old Vivian is trapped in the Vestalis Academy, a prison-like boarding school, and she keeps to herself and sticks her neck out for no one until she's reunited with Sophia, who is a former friend who betrayed her. Together, the girls embark on a dangerous search to uncover the horrifying truth behind their imprisonment. So these girls in this boarding school type environment are promised that once they reach the final level of 16, basically 16 years old, they will be adopted into a wealthy family. So they're taught to be very clean and obedient children, and that the air outside is polluted. They're not taught to read or write. And the environment in this movie feels very sci-fi dystopian, although I don't think you can technically say that this is a dystopian movie, but because the boarding school itself, like the whole movie pretty much takes place there, it feels very dystopian, like this is an alternate reality. And I love that style of movie. Like that's some of my favorite style, like the platform, you know. If you have any other recommendations within that style that's not too dystopian, like too science fiction fantasy, but like dystopian enough that it's like in the near future, please let me know. Anyway, there's a few things that don't really make sense in this movie. Like I do have some questions regarding some of this, but it is a pretty straightforward movie, and like, you know, the plot is really easy to follow, but it does have some great tension because you are trying to figure out like what is with this boarding school. And it is on the lower budget side, but I feel like what they managed to do with that lower budget is actually really amazing. The performances are really great actually, and you can't really tell that it's a low budget, or some people say micro budget. Now this is one that it's been on Netflix for a while, so I feel like a lot of you have probably already seen this already, or at least have seen like the thumbnail of it scrolling. But if not, this is a really entertaining indie movie that I highly, highly recommend, and I think it's a hidden gem. Next up is a movie that I have seen no one mention, not in any of my comments, not on YouTube, unless I missed a video, you know, someone's video somewhere. I mean, I'm sure there's people talking about it. I can't say never. No one's ever said this movie ever before, but just for me personally, I watched this like almost 10 years ago and I've never really seen anyone really mention it. And that's Raze. So Sabrina is kidnapped along with 49 other women and kept in a prison where they are forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of a group of rich elites. Now this is by far hardly a thriller movie. This is by far the most horrific, brutal movie on this list, okay? I would say it's a horror actually, so I don't know if it really fits in this video, but I wanted an excuse to really talk about it because it popped into my mind the other day. I need to rewatch it anyway, but I remember enjoying this movie, and technically thriller is a descriptive word for it, so it's going in the thriller video. Now it's because of the violence. This movie is very gory, and it honestly reminds me of like Saw, like an all-female Saw trap or game. They're not like in a trap, they're in a game. Not even a game, but you know, everyone has to fight to the death. Now the fight scenes themselves feel very realistic, and they are very brutal. Like they are more brutal than like the overly choreographed type action scenes that you would get from like a standard thriller movie or a standard action movie. That's why this leans a little bit more towards the horror side, if that's what you're looking for. Now some claim that this is kind of like misogynistic and exploitative of women because we're just watching women kill each other with their bare hands. So, and there isn't a ton of plot here. Like the description I read to you is pretty much the plot of the movie. There is some like further, we obviously are following the main character, so there's some like backstory there, and there is more to the story as to why they're fighting there in the first place, which you can discover that on your own when you watch the movie. So yes, sometimes it feels a little exploitative and a little like full of itself, of like, look at all these women kill each other, but at the same time I still found it to be an entertaining movie. And it is kind of your standard backstory of like rich elites doing stuff just for entertainment purposes, or like being weird, you know, like Hostel or even Level 16 that I already talked about. But not really, that's not like the same plot by any means. It's a little bit more like Hostel than it is level 16. But all that being said, I think this movie is genuinely good and it has really good performances. It's really well executed. And if you like gore or like trapped kind of games, I think you'd enjoy this one. Okay, next up is a movie that I was obsessed with in high school because it was one of the only like 5 DVDs that I owned at the time, and that is The Forgotten. So Telly is a grieving mother struggling to cope with the loss of her 8-year-old son, and she is stunned when her psychiatrist reveals that she has created 8 years of memories about a son she never had. But when she meets a man who had a similar experience, Telly embarks on a search to prove her son's existence and her sanity. Now, this is another mind-bending movie with an ending that is absolutely, it's so shocking to me. Like, the concept did not see coming. It's so surprising. Like, the explanation for everything, wild. And it's definitely weird. Like, it gets a little weird, but I really don't think anyone can predict like where this is gonna go. If you like the movie Fractured, I think you'd really like this one. They're not like similar in the plot twists or anything like that, because Fractured obviously has a huge plot twist in the end. They're not similar in that way, but just the parents who have lost children and they're trying to prove that their child exists at all. It's kind of a similar situation. Now, a lot of people also compare this to like the X-Files. To me, it leans way more drama than the X-Files, but I could see that. It's kind of like a mystery type vibe. And this one is definitely, like I said, more heavy on the drama. So it's a lot of less action. There's not much action really going on. Julianne Moore kills it though. I love her in this movie. I think it was my first movie I ever watched from her. I think this is one that definitely is better the less you know going into it. So don't watch any trailers. Please do not watch any trailers. Some of them have spoilers in them, and I'm not going to say much else about it. But if you can watch the extended alternate ending version of this movie, I highly recommend that one. Like, if you can find the DVD and watch the alternate ending. So the last thriller movie that I want to talk about is The Glass House. After the parents of Ruby and her younger brother Rhett are killed in a car crash, their parents' best friends Aaron and Terry Glass become their guardians. The children hear promises of a world of opulence and California fun. All they have to do is move into the Glass's gated house. Before very long though, Ruby suspects that Aaron and Terry may not be the ideal guardians they seem to be. So speaking of the X-Files, this movie was actually made by one of the producers from the show, though I don't think any part of this really feels like X-Files by any means. Now, one of the reasons why I feel like this movie isn't as well known and didn't do very well when it came out is because it came out 3 days after 9/11. So really bad timing. Not sure people were going to the theater that much 3 days later, but obviously it's been over 20 years, so a lot of people have probably discovered this movie on their own, but this is one that I like to revisit every now and again. I think it's a really easy watch, and again, the atmosphere of this one is really comfy, and it kind of feels like a teen thriller because we're following Ruby, who's a teenager in high school, and she's kind of angsty, you know, she has that like teen drama stuff going on, so that's something that I always am drawn to in movies. Otherwise, this is pretty much your straightforward orphan teen goes to live with family members or friends of family members type of story where things get weird and like who do you trust, you know? Is it Ruby or is it the couple? I don't know. So it's a typical thriller formula. So really nothing too surprising when it comes to this one, and it is kind of predictable. But there are some twists and turns in there, and I think the execution of it and like the atmosphere building, tension building, there's a lot of that going on and is full of suspense. Even if you know what's going to happen and you think you know exactly what's going on, there's still that suspense there. So it's still an enjoyable watch, and it's also something that's good if you're not looking for like a hard watch. If you don't want to watch something like Stay where it takes effort to you know, your brain is going to be like, what's going on? This one's pretty straightforward. So it's not a lot of effort. You can just pop it on if you have something else to do. You want to multitask. It has a great cast as well. It has Lily Sobieski. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. I'm obsessed with her first name, first of all. Lily. Iconic. Diane Lane and Stellan Skarsgård, so it has a Skarsgård in there. But yeah, something about this movie is just so comfy, and I love going back to it and like rewatching it, especially once you know everything. It's just like if you're having an anxiety-filled day, this is one of those that you could just pop on, you know, it's so easy. And the setting's really cool. You know, you have the creepy house, it's made of glass and it's beautiful and like obviously very cold and uncomfy. I would never live there, but it makes for a really good thriller movie setting. And of course there's rainy scenes. It's gotta have rain in there because it's a thriller movie. Anyway, those are my 5 thriller movie recommendations that hopefully you haven't seen at least one of them, so you have a movie night coming up. You can throw one of these on. Let me know other thriller movies that you love and maybe think are hidden gems, or just in general, share your favorite thriller movies down below. Let's discuss thrillers. We hardly do that. Let's talk about it. So leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.